The room sparkled with soft lighting and polished silverware. Laughter echoed off crystal glasses as servers floated by, with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was supposed to be one of the happiest evenings of my life, my son's engagement dinner. A night to celebrate, a night to be proud. Instead, I stood in the middle of it, utterly invisible, until I wasn't. It was halfway through the evening when it happened. The moment that cut so deep, I can still feel it echo. Everyone, she said, raising her glass and her chin simultaneously. I'd like to thank the woman who made all this possible. People turned to look at me. I felt my cheeks warm. My eyes welled with the kind of tears that usually come from gratitude. I wasn't ready for what came next. "This is Margaret," she said, smiling sweetly, arm extended toward me. She practically raised Daniel. She cleaned, cooked, drove him to school, folded every shirt the boy ever wore. She was like, "Our maid. Right, sweetheart?" A few people chuckled. A few glanced at Daniel. He looked down at his plate. He didn't laugh. But he didn't say a word. Not even a whisper of correction. Not a single glance my way. I froze, glass in hand, caught between disbelief and humiliation. My skin prickled. My throat tightened. Maid, she had twisted a lifetime of mothering into a job description. And my son, my Daniel, my gentle boy, who used to hold my hand when he was scared of thunder, just sat there. I smiled. Because if I hadn't, I would have cried. I raised my glass in return, said thank you, and took a sip like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. But inside me, something changed. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even grief. It was clarity. A clear line drawn between who I was in his life and who I was no longer. I stayed until dessert, smiled in every photo, hugged people I barely knew, listened to strangers toast the happy couple. Not once did Daniel come over to me. Not once did he say, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not even later when I hugged him goodbye. He hugged me quickly, lightly, like I was someone else's aunt, like I was decoration. I got in my car and sat there for 15 full minutes before turning the engine on. I stared out at the venue. All that beauty, all that pride, all that pretense. He used to bring me dandelions. He used to cry when I missed his soccer games. He used to call me his hero. Now, he sat across a candlelit table, letting a woman he barely knew recast his mother as hired help. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in my small house, the same house I raised him in. I walked into his old room, still lined with trophies and photos, and I realized every single thing in there, every single memory had come from me. Not her. Me. The clothes, the food, the Christmases where I worked overtime to buy him that guitar. The years I skipped my own birthday dinner because he had a school recital. The nights I held his forehead through fevers and breakups. And she called me the maid. And he said nothing. But I said nothing too. Not that night, because I had decided I wasn't going to argue with them. I was going to show them. Not by raising my voice, but by raising my standards. He may have been her fiancé, but I was still his mother, and they were about to remember that. Daniel was the kind of child who made motherhood feel like a calling. He was born in a thunderstorm, small, soft, and already wide-eyed, like he didn't want to miss a thing. He clung to me with tiny fingers, and that was it. I was his anchor, his world. He was mine. Growing up, he was sweet, attentive. He'd leave sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Thanks for the pancakes," or "You're the best mom." He called me every day when he went to college, even if just to say hi. When he got his first apartment, I helped him move in. When he got his first raise, he took me to dinner and held my hand across the table like a little boy in a grown man's body. He remembered birthdays, wrote thank you cards, brought me flowers on Mother's Day, not out of duty, but love. And then came her, Sabrina. I'll never forget the first time he brought her over. She was beautiful, polished. The kind of woman who never said excuse me when she corrected you mid-sentence. She looked around my home like it was a museum of mistakes. Too many old things, too many sentimental touches. She smiled politely, but never warmly. At dinner, she commented on my tableware. "Vintage," she said, lifting the fork like it might snap. "Charming." I told her it was my mother's set. She didn't respond. When Daniel excused himself to take a call, she leaned in and said, You did your job well raising him. You must be proud. Not you must be close. Not you two have such a bond. Just a nod to my function. That was the beginning of the shift. Daniel stopped calling as often. When I'd ask how he was doing, I'd get half answers spoken with glances over his shoulder. He started saying we instead of I. He stopped inviting me to things, said Sabrina was handling the guest list. And she handled everything. She corrected me when I told stories, reminded him when he forgot details, spoke for him, even when he was in the room. And slowly, I watched my son fade behind her presence, like mist behind glass. He never spoke ill of me, but he never stood up for me either. When I once offered to help with their engagement party planning, she said, "I think we've got it covered. Maybe you could focus on something simple, like the flowers." Daniel said nothing. Just looked at me, like maybe I should be grateful. I should have known then what the dinner would be, but mothers hope even when they know better. I kept telling myself he was under pressure, that he loved me, but didn't know how to balance her pride with his past, that he'd eventually see. But then he let her say those words, "our maid," and stayed silent. It wasn't that he didn't defend me. It was that he didn't even seem to see me. The boy I raised, the one who once cried when I missed a school play, was gone. And the man who sat beside her that night, he wasn't my son anymore. Not the way he used to be. The table was long and perfectly set, draped in ivory linen, lined with crystal goblets and silverware so polished I could see my reflection in every spoon. I had worn my best dress, navy blue, long-sleeved, the one Daniel always said made me look presidential. I smiled when he said that once. But that night, he didn't notice. He barely looked up. The evening started with polite chatter. Sabrina's family went around the table, giving toasts, half-hearted anecdotes about love and new beginnings. I tried to join the conversation once or twice, asking her mother what flowers they were using in the ceremony. She blinked. "White roses, I think. You know, simple." That word again. Simple. It followed me like a shadow all night. In how they glanced over my head when speaking. In how Sabrina subtly steered Daniel's hand away when he reached for mine under the table. In how they arranged the seating chart, placing me at the far end, next to a cousin I'd never met, like an afterthought. But the real unraveling began with the story. She stood up, glass in hand, and tapped it lightly with her fork. A soft ding silenced the table. All eyes turned to her. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she began, flashing her perfect white teeth. "It means the world to Daniel and me." She glanced at him. He smiled nervously, but he smiled. "And I want to especially thank someone very important." My heart paused. I sat a little straighter. Finally, she turned toward me. "This is Margaret," she said, placing a graceful hand on my shoulder. She helped raise Daniel. She was the one folding laundry, packing lunches, making sure everything ran smoothly. A murmur of polite appreciation rippled through the table. "She's basically been like our," she paused, eyes twinkling as if reaching for the perfect punchline. "Our maid." "Right!" The room tensed. A few guests laughed. The kind of nervous laugh that hopes someone else will fix what just happened. I waited for Daniel to speak. To smile awkwardly maybe, but then gently say, "Actually, this is my mom." To grab my hand, to fix it. But he didn't. He looked down at his plate. He didn't touch my shoulder, didn't glance my way. He just let it hang there, like truth, like it wasn't wrong. And in that moment, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt erased. My name was said, but not my title. Not mom, not mother. Just a vague nod to service, not sacrifice, not love, just labor. My entire life with him reduced to a list of chores. They moved on to dessert, chocolate mousse, champagne, toasts to the future. I barely tasted a thing. I watched as Daniel laughed with her father, toasted with her friends, leaned into her, as though they were one organism moving forward in time without me. And I realized this wasn't just one moment. This had been happening for months, maybe years. I'd just been too hopeful to see it. That night, when the last toast was made and the last plate cleared, I walked up to Daniel. I hugged him. He hugged me back, barely. "Congratulations," I whispered. He smiled, thin and tired. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you came." I nodded. Me too. It wasn't true, but it was the last thing I would say to him in a long time. Because something broke that night, not with a scream, not with an argument, but with silence. His silence. And mine. I didn't attend the wedding. The invitation arrived weeks later, engraved in gold, wrapped in ivory ribbon, addressed to Ms. Margaret Hale. Not mother of the groom. Just Margaret. I held the envelope in my hands for a long time before tossing it into the drawer with the warranty manuals and expired coupons. It belonged in the past. So did the version of me who would have smiled and shown up anyway, just to keep the peace. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was still his mother, but I was no longer his fool. Instead of RSVPing, I began making appointments. One with a notary, one with my attorney, one with the women's shelter on 8th Street, the same one I turned to when Daniel was 5, and his father walked out without saying goodbye. I had almost nothing then. No money, no family willing to help, just a child in my arms and a heart that refused to give up. That shelter saved me, fed us, found us a bed, gave me job training interview clothes and hope. So I gave something back. On the morning of their wedding, while Sabrina walked down the aisle in lace, and my son stood waiting in tailored silence, I mailed out an envelope of my own. It was addressed to them both. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a letter and a copy of a legal document that would change everything they expected. The letter read, "Daniel and Sabrina, you once referred to me as a maid. That was your choice. This is mine. The home you were raised in, the one you assumed you'd inherit someday, it no longer belongs to you. It now belongs to the Eleanor Hale Foundation, named after my mother, and built through the sweat of my back the nights I skipped dinner so Daniel could eat, and the decades I worked 2 jobs while Sabrina laughs about her Pilates schedule. The Foundation's mission is simple to house and empower women who've been left behind. You see, Daniel, I never needed thanks, but I did deserve respect. And you watched her humiliate me. You did nothing, so now I do something. This is my wedding gift to you both. Nothing. Except maybe the lesson that silence has a cost. May you learn the value of presence before it's too late for someone else in your life. Mom." Later that week, the shelter director called me in tears. She had already ordered new bunk beds for the converted bedrooms, said I'd changed lives. I didn't tell her why I'd done it. I didn't need to. The next time I heard from Daniel, it was a knock on my door. I didn't open it. I watched from the window as he stood there in his blue dress shirt, holding a bouquet of white roses, Mama's favorite. He knocked again. He waited 10 minutes, and then he left. I didn't need to hear what he had to say, because the moment he said nothing, when he could have said everything, had already spoken loud enough for the both of us. He came by twice more. The second time, he brought my favorite apple pie from Johnson's Bakery, the one 2 towns over. He used to ride his bike there every summer just to surprise me. I almost smiled when I saw the box, but I didn't answer the door. Not because I hated him, because I needed him to understand some wounds don't heal with apologies wrapped in sugar and ribbon. Some silences echo louder than shouts, and sometimes not standing up for someone is the betrayal. I watched from the window as he sat on my porch steps for a while, shoulders hunched, hands clasped. His wedding ring caught the light, and for a second, I remembered the little boy who used to sit on that same step, watching ants crawl between the cracks in the wood, asking me if bugs had families too. Now he was the man who let his wife strip my identity in front of a room full of strangers, and didn't flinch. After a while, he stood up. He left the pie on the step. I didn't bring it inside. The next time he came, I wasn't home. I had gone to the shelter. They were painting the living room that day, sunflower yellow. One of the women, barely 20, was holding her baby with one hand and rolling paint with the other. She smiled at me, shy but proud. "You're the one who gave us this place, right?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm gonna name my daughter Eleanor," she said. And just like that, the ache in my chest loosened. Not because it was gone, but because it had somewhere else to live. Somewhere better. Somewhere it could bloom again. That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, the window open to the spring breeze. I looked at the photo on the fridge, me and Daniel, 10 years old, flower on his nose, both of us laughing like we had nothing to prove to anyone. He'd loved me then. I knew he still did now. But love isn't just emotion, it's action, it's protection. It's saying, "That's my mother," when someone tries to humiliate her in public. It's standing up even when it's awkward. Even when it causes waves. He didn't do that. And no matter how many pies or flowers or doorstep visits came after that moment, was a bell that couldn't be unrung. I had walked away, not to punish him, but to preserve me, to preserve what was left of a mother's dignity that had already been chipped away in too many rooms where I gave everything and was handed silence in return. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know I saw what I did. And what I didn't do. She's gone. I let go of the wrong person. I hope one day you'll let me sit with you in the kitchen again. I won't say a word, I'll just listen. D." I folded the letter gently, placed it in a drawer beside the photograph on the fridge. I haven't written him back. Not because I won't. Because right now, I'm still listening to myself. Have you ever walked away from someone you loved because silence hurt more than words? Tell your story in the comments. Because sometimes the loudest thing you'll ever say is nothing at all.